When did everything become so millennial coded? Every movie now is rife with millennial humor. You know the type. Snarky, self-referential banter, a machine gun rip of one-liners, pop culture drops, and heroes who trauma dump via sarcasm. It's become so common that it's become the norm. It makes you wonder if we've ever known any other way. And don't forget about the economic dependence the consumerist beast has on non-stop nostalgia baiting. So fine of an art nostalgia baiting has become, interwoven through each interconnected metaverse of collectible IPs feeding the ever-growing Disney empire, quirky Disney adults marching with their baby Yodas in neat lines, the mouse's ears atop their head filled with all the dopamine one could ask for. And it's all just one tap of the card away. And it's not normal, but rather the result of a particular set of circumstances. Once upon a time, things were very different. They weren't so meta, not so self-aware. Companies merchandised the simple old-fashioned way, with sugar and kids' TV shows that were made to sell toys to kids, like the good Lord intended. The reality is that we are very far away from such an innocent time. We live in the age of the millennial, and we have for quite a while now. But why? Why is everything 80s and 90s plus a dash of the early 2000s instead of, say, the 50s or 20s? And will there come a time when we're nostalgic for the 2010s? No, don't be silly. The simple answer is that millennials are loud. You could say they're cultural heavyweights, and the reasons go far deeper than memes or social media algorithms, or even population size and wealth. Studies consistently show higher rates of major depressive disorder and generalized anxiety among millennials than they do Gen X and boomers. Not much of a surprise when you consider them the generation of broken dreams, filled with all those bright hopes and wishes only to have them dashed by the 2008 financial crisis. A whole generation entered the workforce at the worst possible moment, and it has been a struggle for them ever since, faced with slower wealth accumulation and delayed milestones like home ownership and starting families. Millennials were a generation that were raised on the promise that if you work hard, you'll get ahead, only for that promise to be shattered against the hard, uncaring surface of a brutal reality. Well, at least if you were in the developed world. If you were in the developing world at that time, you basically experienced the opposite, as Western jobs were outsourced in the millions. But now AI is taking those outsourced jobs back, so if you want to learn more about that, check out this video. Either way, crushed dreams removed any hope for the future, and with that came a deeply ingrained mistrust and general cynicism towards the present. To the millennial, everything is shitty. Everything except the past. More precisely, their past. The only source of joy they could find was in the memories of their innocent, sugar-blasted childhoods. And so a powerful emotional pull was created in the millennial towards the past. Nostalgia became a form of coping, a comforting escape from the stress of today or the worries of tomorrow. Millennials didn't just miss the past, though. They wanted to relive it, and were more than happy to pay. But this nostalgic desire for the past wouldn't have been possible were it not for, like I was saying before that title screen rudely interrupted me. Hey, do you like that meta joke? I'm aware of the fact that this is a YouTube video. So if you're a millennial, your dopaminergic neurons are releasing yummy dopamine, inclining you to like and subscribe. And if you're Gen Z, then for reasons I will explain another time, you're going to copy the millennial because you had a bad childhood. If you're Gen X, then for reasons I won't explain later, you don't matter. And if you're a boomer, the like button looks like a thumbs up. Wait, where was I? Oh, right. Yeah, so nostalgia only works if you have something worth being nostalgic over. And millennials certainly did. By wide cultural consensus, the 1980s through the early 2000s represent the peak era to grow up in. But to understand why, we have to understand why, objectively, scientifically, the other generations grew up in the worst of times. Now, for the record, I don't belong to any of these generations. We didn't have generations back where I'm from. Let's take a look at the boomers first. When they were kids, there was Vietnam, Korea, a hell of a lot of assassinations, civil unrest, oil shocks, and rising crime as the nation went through several complicated upheavals that would fundamentally change American society. Hard numbers back up the perception. US violent crime rates exploded from the 60s through the early 90s, hitting around 750 offenses per 100K before plummeting. By the 90s and early 2000s, many safety metrics for kids had improved dramatically compared to previous decades, as the child death rates dropped to roughly 1/3 of what they were in the mid-70s. Suffice to say, it sucked. Now sure, the 50s looked idyllic on the surface, but that's just it. Boomer nostalgia is limited almost entirely to a rather shallow concept of the 50s, itself almost entirely limited to its physical manifestation in the form of the diner. And those diners are dying out as boomer money dwindles. So, while the boomers did fancy themselves a little bit of nostalgia, considering that by many metrics the nation has gone a bit topsy-turvy since they were born, oops, coincidence maybe? Even when they did have the money to spend, their nostalgia was limited, because their childhood joys were limited to the times they snuck out to the soda fountain between spankings. Now, let's see what limited the nostalgic aspirations of Gen X. Let's see. What does Gen X like about their childhoods? Drinking from hoses, and something about freedom and latchkey? What's latchkey? So, Gen X grew up against the backdrop of peak Cold War nuclear fears, more oil shocks, a sprinkle of assassinations, and otherwise a transition period marked more by its beginning and end than anything that really happened in between. Too young to have seen the 50s, too old to know how to use a computer, in the world of statistics, Gen X is the milquetoast of data, truly inconsequential in all things but their pocketbooks. And, wouldn't you know it, they end up buying millennial crap too, because many of them were entering adulthood during the 80s and starting families in the 90s. And so they're pretty nostalgic for a time when their kids were young and didn't suck so much. Let's just be real. Millennials grew up in the sweet spot. Safer streets, post-Cold War optimism, and an economic boom that created a vibrant pop culture. Starting in the 80s but peaking in the 90s was a time when the business world was entering rapid evolution, experimenting with wacky new ways to market sugar and toys to kids. And while it wasn't safe, and gave many of these kids horrible diseases, they had fun. You didn't have to grow up in the 90s to know that this was the time to be born. Unlike me, in 1780s Eastern Europe. There's also a point to be made about the stage technology was in during this time. Millennials grew up during the rapid commercial explosion of technology, a transitional generation like Gen X, but unlike Gen X, technology was in a much more user-friendly state, granting a great deal of digital freedom. Yet, it was not so widespread and developed that it was addicting, prawn-infested, or as dangerous as it is today. Kids today contend with a very real danger when interfacing with the World Wide Web, an STD-infested cesspit compared to what the 90s kids had to experience. And so, while other generations have had their share of depression and aversion to reality, they don't have those things to the same extent as millennials, who also just so happen to have what seems like an objectively golden age childhood, resulting in plentiful fuel for the nostalgia engine. The last remaining piece of the puzzle is... it all comes down to the money, baby. Millennials don't just feel the nostalgia, they have the numbers and this spending behavior to turn it into a market-dominating force. As of 2025, millennials numbered about 47 million Americans, 22% of the total population and the largest living generation. That sheer size gives them outsized influence, but size alone isn't enough. Their spending behavior is what sets them apart. According to the latest Bureau of Labor Statistics Consumer Expenditure Survey, Gen X still edges out per household spending at around $95K annually. Millennials come in at about $85K per household. But here's the key difference. Millennials have always allocated a higher share of what they have to exactly the categories nostalgia marketing loves: dining out, entertainment, clothing, experiences, toys, and collectibles. Even back when they were younger and had less money, millennials devoted more of their total spending to frivolous luxuries than Gen X or boomers did at the same life stage. It's all that avocado toast, people. If only were it not for those juicy, plump Mexican avocados, you could have had a house. Fast forward to today, and that pattern has only amplified. Millennials account for roughly 29% of all US retail spending, around $1.2 trillion annually. They're the core drivers of the exploding kidult economy, adults buying toys and collectibles for themselves. In 2026, kidults, I hate that word, are projected to represent 28% of global toy sales, a $423 billion market, fueled heavily by millennial nostalgia for the 80s, 90s, and the early 2000s. Because they were the first generation to grow up alongside a juvenile internet, dial-up in the 90s to social media in their teens and 20s, they mastered broadcasting those nostalgic tastes at scale. Older generations simply weren't in those digital spaces in the same numbers or with the same fluency. The result? Millennial perspectives flood discussions about culture, social change, and how things used to be. They were depressed. They longed for their golden childhood. They skipped having kids so they could keep chasing that dragon. And they had the tech savvy to make sure you all longed for the 90s too. This isn't just about digging at the IP graveyard until each plot is emptied out and ground into nostalgia mush, or Baby Yoda merch. It also explains why you hear so few voices from boomers or Gen X reflecting on adult life in earlier eras. Those generations lived through massive social and technological shifts too, but they're less online, less in creator spaces, and less amplified by the nostalgia spending flywheel. Millennials fill the vacuum of their silence. And the real test is coming. Gen Z is already proving to be a glutton for nostalgia too, yet many of them are romanticizing the exact millennial childhood they didn't fully live through. As Gen Z fully enters adulthood over the next decade, we'll see whether they long for their own iPad kid era, or keep fueling the 90s and Y2K machine. Gen X bent the knee. Will Z as well? The millennial cultural heavyweight era has reshaped how we remember the past, and how we consume the present. Like a disease, it has infected nearly every aspect of our society, and it shows very little sign of stopping. Millennials seem to have infiltrated almost every mid-level management and HR position of the very companies that feed their addiction to nostalgia, and for them to suck on the sweet teat of nostalgia until their very last dying suckle, they must convince you to be like them. You can like the 90s without living in the past, and you can be self-aware without making everything a cringy meta commentary. I never actually wrote an ending to this. I didn't really write Huh. Like, subscribe, write a mean comment, tell me how I'm wrong. I think that's about it.